So, scatter plots are a way of visualizing what the data looks like. And we can see in these examples that the data is trending up. So, the taller the father is, the taller their son is. That makes sense. We expect height is something that is passed down um, genetically. And so, we expect people who are tall to give birth to people that are tall, that become tall at least. So, and we see that that's really the trend we see in this data, that the taller the father is, the taller the son tends to be. Now that language is important. It doesn't mean that if your father is tall that you're going to be tall. We know that there's more factors and it's not just your father's genetic makeup that's going to be passed on to you. But we tend to see that happen. And so that's what we're talking about is tendencies and trends. We're trying to predict. We do a better job predicting the height of the son if we know the height of the father, and vice versa. So a positive relationship is when two variables vary in the same direction. When cases of the lower variables on one variable tend to have lower values on the second variable, and cases with higher variables on one variable tend to have higher values on the second variable. In the same way, a negative relationship is what happens when these variables vary in opposite directions. So here we are looking at a scatter plot of education level and score on a prejudice assessment. So what we find is that people with little education score higher on score a higher prejudice score than people who have more education. And the tendency or the trend is that the more education someone has, the lower their prejudice score will be. And that the higher their prejudice score, the lower their education will be. So as one variable increases, the other variable decreases. And that's what a negative association tells us. So cases on the lower values of one variable will tend to be connected to higher values on the second variable, and cases with higher values on one variable will tend to have lower variables on the second variable. Now, this third chart shows no relationship. So there does not appear to be a pattern in the scores that we can see from the scatter plot when we look at the amount of rainfall in a day and the number of babies born in that day. So if we look at how much it rained, we can't really do a good job of predicting how many babies were born. So there is no relationship between those two. We wouldn't expect there to be. It's kind of an odd thing, but we don't see a relationship. There's no pattern. It essentially, I don't know if you have seen a shotgun blast, but it essentially is just like it's randomly scattered across the board. So that's no relationship. So positive relationship, they trend up in the same direction. Negative relationship, as one variable gets larger, the other one gets smaller. And so you see this trending downward across the chart. And then no relationship when it looks like it's just randomly placed on the scatter plot. No pattern in the scores. We also can talk about the strength of the relationship, but the strength of the relationship is not the same as the significance of the relationship. So we're going to talk about strength, direction, and statistical significance. So two variables may be associated with each other, maybe moderately or weakly associated with each other, or even strongly associated or correlated, but that correlation is not statistically significant. It doesn't meet our criteria, our 0.05 requirement that we see. That p-value, that alpha value, it doesn't meet that criteria. So we didn't have any charts last week, but we're going to have charts again this week looking at assessing statistical significance and using degrees of freedom to determine what our critical value is in our assessment of the relationship between two variables using correlation.